13 Lectures on the Apocalypse by Brother Robert Roberts. The 11th lecture, Revelation 17 and 18. In the 17th and 18th chapters of the Apocalypse, we shall find ourselves very closely face to face with the subject of Rome. You may think we have had very much of this subject already. No doubt we have. It is a matter of surprise with some people that there is so much about Rome in the interpretation of the Apocalypse. It is certainly the fact that we are never well away from her in the course of the interpretation. It is really no matter of marvel when the relation of Rome to the history of the divine purpose is realized. We may fail to realize this if we live too closely in the narrow circle of our own affairs. Most people never get out of this circle. To them, their own affairs, their own street, their own acquaintance, their own town, is the measure of their estimate of what is valuable and important. Their own country is the widest stretch of their horizon. The present hour is the only reality with them, and only that within the circle of their senses. Europe, even of the present hour, is to them a misty abstraction, a something in which they feel no interest. As for Europe of the past, it has no existence for them. To such the Apocalypse is in the same position, and worse. Not only a dark riddle, but a riddle of which they never heard. However, we are not here to discuss their doleful case. Your knowledge of the truth is a guarantee that in some measure you have ascended from their low-lying plane of life and mounted to some height in the nobler life which consists, among other things, of a knowledge of the past in its relation to the present and future well-being of man in the highest sense. In this position you are able to realize why it is that Rome occupies so large a place in John's prophetic vision of what was to occupy European history between the first and second advents of Christ. She fills so large a place in the vision because she was to fill so large a place in the history. We cannot look back in the most cursory manner without seeing how large her place in the past has been. She was the destroyer of Christ, the slayer of the apostles, the enemy of the faith, and then the professor and champion and corrupter of the faith. She has been the leading influence in the European economy, and continues to affect the principles and control the actions of millions in every country. She is so large and powerful an institution to the present that, notwithstanding the fall of the temporal power, and the circumscription of the power and wealth of the Church in all countries, statesmen cannot leave the Vatican out of account in their combinations and calculations. No wonder, then, that Rome should be in sight, so to speak, in nearly all the scenes exhibited to John in forecast of European events. Some people have a difficulty in realizing that we are with Rome in chapters 17 and 18, because we read a deal about Babylon and nothing about Rome. Rome, they say, is not Babylon, and Babylon is not Rome. Well, if we were dealing with a literal book, their remarks might have some force. But as has already abundantly transpired, we are dealing with a book of figures and symbols confessedly such, yet symbols not wrapped up in utter obscurity. Symbols whose significance is allowed to appear here and there in a manner that supplies clues and keys, putting it into our power to trace and unlock the hidden meanings. Babylon is no exception to this. We read much about Babylon in chapters 17 and 18, and if we have nothing more than the name, we should be at a loss. But we have more than the name. We have it in associations that guide us to its application. When we ask to what and to whom the term is applied, we find ourselves in the presence of the interpretation at once. For example, there are rejoicings at the downfall of Babylon. Among others, we find the apostles commanded to rejoice. Verse 20. Rejoice over her, thou heaven, and ye holy apostles. Why were they called upon to rejoice? For God hath avenged you on her. From this it follows that the Babylon of the chapter was the murderer of the apostles. We have only to ask, who killed the apostles, to find out what is meant by Babylon in the Apocalypse. It was not Babylon on the Euphrates, nor the Babylon of Nebuchadnezzar and evil Merodach that put the apostles to death. It was Rome on the Tiber, Babylon of the 7 hills. This identifies Babylon with Rome at once. The result is reached in another way. There is a certain symbol labelled Babylon. The label is this. It is in the 5th verse of chapter 17. Mystery. Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. To what is this label affixed? Not to a city, but to a woman. It is writing on the woman's forehead. I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-coloured beast, and upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery, Babylon. This shows the name is not used plainly. It is used in mystery, with a hidden and not a plain meaning, and it is in the first instance applied to a woman and not a city. But this woman stood for a city. So John was told, verse 18, The woman which thou sawest is that great city, which reigneth over the kings of the earth. What great city reigned over the kings of the earth in the days of John? When this is answered, Babylon is identified, and the woman's name becomes the name of the city. There is only one answer. One city was great, reigning over the kings of the earth, and that city was Rome. When to these two simple and unquestionable modes of identification you add the fact that Rome, in her political and ecclesiastical relations, has been the one eclipsing figure on the historic stage in all the 18 centuries that have elapsed since Christ's departure, the conclusion is established beyond the reach of objection or doubt. Babylon apocalyptically is Rome, just as France is the street of Sodom, chapter 11, verse 8. It is impossible to go forward in the understanding of the apocalypse without having that conclusion forced on conviction. The woman named Babylon was seen sitting upon many waters, chapter 17, verse 1. What is signified by the many waters? Verse 15 answers, The waters thou sawest where the whore sitteth are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. Literal Babylon has sustained no such relation to the population of the world since Christ went away. Literal Babylon has ceased to exist at all, in accordance with the prophecy of her downfall, which said, Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldees' excellency, shall be as when God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. It shall never be dwelt in from generation to generation. Isaiah 13, verse 19 to 20. It shall no more be inhabited, from generation to generation. Jeremiah 50, verse 39. But Rome has answered to the prophecy exactly. She has brooded upon all nations. She has sat on the many waters. But her seat had a particular shape. And here again, Rome is forced upon our attention. She sat on a scarlet-coloured beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. Verse 3. What may be the meaning of this hideous piece of heraldry? The angel gave a word of explanation to John, verse 9, prefacing the words, "Here is wisdom," which is an intimation that it required discernment to penetrate the meaning. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth, and in addition to that, there is this further meaning. There are 7 kings, or sovereignties, forms of government. 5 are fallen, 1 is, and the other is not yet come. Rome, as built on 7 hills, is notorious. But here is a further explanation, which connects the 7-headed symbol with a form of government actually existing in John's day, and whose 5 predecessors had passed away. 5 are fallen, 1 is. Such was the fact concerning Rome. The city of the 7 hills had passed through 5 forms of government, viz. 1, the regal, 2, the consular, 3, the dictatorial, 4, the decemviral, 5, the tribunicial, the 6th was the imperial, which was in the fullness of its power when the apocalypse was angelically communicated to John. This was the political structure upholding the Babylon of the apocalypse in her place in history. We look at history, and literal Babylon is nowhere to be seen, while Rome is, in all the exact relations prefigured by the symbolism. Furthermore, the Babylon of the apocalypse is contemporary with the Lord's reappearance in the earth. She meets her doom at his hands, as was evident from the things we had to look at in the 16th chapter last Thursday evening. After the Lord had come as a thief, chapter 16, verse 15, great Babylon comes into remembrance before God, to give unto her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath. It is further proved by the song of the redeemed, when the triumphs effected by Christ are celebrated. Hallelujah! Salvation and glory and honour and power unto the Lord our God, for true and righteous are his judgments. For he hath judged the great whore, which did corrupt the earth with her fornication, and hath avenged the blood of his servants at her hand. Revelation 19, verse 1 and 2. This proves that the apocalyptic Babylon has a long career before the Lord's coming, and receives the retribution of that career when he comes. The inapplicability of this to literal Babylon is evident at a glance. Its suitability to the case of Rome is complete. Finally, the image vision of Nebuchadnezzar, divinely interpreted by Daniel, Daniel chapter 2, taken in connection with the vision of the 4 beasts shown to Daniel himself, Daniel 7, shows that Babylon, the destroyer of the saints, corrupter of the earth, the queen of many waters, must be Roman. For by these visions it is shown that it is the Roman iron and clay that receives the shattering blow of the stone, that it is the Roman or 4th beast with papal little horn and companion kings that is given to the burning flame by the Lord at his coming. The apocalyptic Babylon must be in the feet of iron and clay, and in the Roman monster of the night visions. We look at Europe as it is now, in the light of these symbols, and it requires no dogmatism to say that Babylon is there. The Roman habitable is subdivided, as Daniel's vision require. It is cut up into a number of separate yet connected sovereignties, and prominent among the elements constituting this fourth beast dominion is to be seen an ecclesiastical Babylon, an ecclesiastical woman, Mother Church, focused in the city of the Seven Hills, born on the back of the political system subsisting in all the kingdoms of Europe. The evidence is complete, and the conclusion is very important. For Rome being Babylon, we are enabled in the things said of Babylon to see Rome as God sees her, and to gauge our relations to the present time accordingly. In what aspect, then, is Rome presented to us in the chapters under our consideration this evening? The answer is very interesting. She is introduced to us in the aspect in which she appears at the time of the end. The symbolism of chapters 17 and 18 relates largely to the day in which we live. This will be evident from a consideration of who it was that exhibited the matter in these chapters to John, and what he said. It is one of the 7 angels which had the 7 vials that said to John, "Come hither, I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore." The 7 vials belong to the end, and for one of the 7 outpourers of these vials to show John what is recorded in chapters 17 and 18 is as much as to intimate that what he exhibited appertained to the vial era or time of the end. This is more evident from the nature of his communication. For John to be shown the judgment of the great whore was to be taken to the time of the end, when that judgment is to be inflicted. It is under the 7th vial, as we have seen, that great Babylon comes into remembrance before God, to receive the cup of the fierceness of his wrath. Therefore, for a vile angel to say, "Come hither, and I will show thee the judgment of the great war," is as much as saying he would show John in fullness and in detail what is only hinted at under the 7th vial. This judgment is after the coming of Christ, as shown by its position in the vials. The coming of Christ is under the 6th vial, see chapter 16, verse 15, and it is between the first and second parts of the vial. Under the first part there is a preparation for the gathering of the nations to Armageddon. Then there is the thief-like coming. Then there is the gathering to Armageddon, the locality of which is made certain by Ezekiel 38 and Joel chapter 3. Christ's coming is between the preparation for the gathering and the gathering itself. And after the gathering and overthrow of the armies occurs the final judgment on Babylon. The preparation is the drying of the Euphrates and the activities of the frogs. These have been the conspicuous features of the situation for many years. This is why we entertain the expectation of the coming of Christ at any time. He carried me away in the Spirit into the wilderness. And I saw a woman sitting upon a scarlet-coloured beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. John observed that the woman was richly arrayed and intoxicated. His attention was earnestly aroused. The picture before him was the symbol of the system of things in the Roman habitable, upon which the destroying judgment of God was to be poured out under the 7th vial. It is the same system that has existed in all the ages that have elapsed since Christ's departure, but with modifications from time to time. The 7 heads and 10 horns identify it inseparably with historic Rome, but the particular scene witnessed by John exhibited the constitution of Europe at the coming crisis of judgment. We look at the European system of today, and we ask, is there any correspondence to this symbol? Is there a consideration of powers on the Roman basis, independently sovereign, and yet combining to sustain among them an ecclesiastical system enthroned on the 7 hills, historically reeking with the blood of heretics? Everyone knows that this is just the situation of affairs. The scarlet-bodied beast is the body politic of Europe. Its colour is the symbol of sin. Though your sins be as scarlet, Isaiah 1 verse 18, showing that, in divine estimation, European society, which considers itself Christian and holy, is steeped in wickedness. The names of blasphemy with which the body is said to be full are the great and swelling titles, ecclesiastical, military, and civil, from the Holy Father down to the meanest reverend, with which the system abounds, which gratify the carnal ambitions of the wearers and rob God of his due. For God only is great, and his name only to be had in reverence, as will be the case in the age about to succeed the present, when the lofty looks of man shall be humbled, and the haughtiness of man is brought low, and the Lord alone is exalted in that day. John wondered at the spectacle, and the angel said he would tell him the mystery, that is, the concealed meaning of the woman and of the beast that carried her. Verse 7. The angel then proceeds to explain various particulars at which we have already looked. They lay hold of historic features, that is, of things that have transpired in ages past. This may seem to conflict with the idea that the picture seen represents the constitution of Europe at the crisis of the Advent. But this feeling will disappear if we realize that you cannot look upon the system at the present moment without looking upon much that is historic. You look at the Pope, for example. He's not the creation of today. His position and pretensions require centuries for the explanation of their existence. So with the confederated sovereignties and the names and titles of the European system. You are looking on history when you look on these, and if you suppose a friend showing and explaining to you the system as it is today, you will easily realize how much of this explanation would relate to long past accomplished things. So it is with the angel's explanation to John. It goes back in the history of the beast and the woman, while dealing with the system as it appears in the time of the end, at the crisis of its destruction. The angel made to John this curious statement. The beast that thou sawest was, and is not, and yet is. There is something like an explanation of this puzzle in the words that immediately follow. First, as to the was, verse 10, 5 are fallen. Second, as to the is, 1 is. Third, as to is not, the other is not yet come. This is said in explanation of the 7 heads of the beast. The 7 heads cover the whole period of time in which the beast having the 7 heads appears in various forms. When we recognize that the things here spoken of are all aspects of the one Roman system, which has had an unbroken history of over 2,000 years, and that these aspects at the moment of their existence were to be seen only one at a time, and yet were the same thing in different forms, we may understand the obscure and apparently contradictory statement made by the angel. The beast, the body politic of Europe in its Roman constitution, was before John's day. It had already filled a large place in accomplished history. Yet in the particular latter-day phase exhibited in the symbol shown, viz., organized as a church militant, upheld by a concurrence of separate sovereignties into which Rome was to be split up, it was not. It had not come. This phase was something not to appear on the historic stage for centuries. Yet in the existing Roman power that in John's day bare rule over all the earth, upon which afterwards a false profession of Christianity was to be engrafted, with the result of developing the final phase, the beast could be said to be. There is a further apparent obscurity which disappears with all the facts in view, viz. The statement, the beast that was and is not, even he is the eighth and is of the seven, and goeth into perdition. The Roman beast at the crisis of its destruction is the papal phase of the beast, and therefore the eighth in the history of the changes in the forms of government that the Roman system has passed through. It may be well here to repeat the enumeration, gone through a little way back, for another purpose. 1. Regal, 2. Consular, 3. Dictatorial, 4. Decemviral, 5. Tribunicial, 6. Imperial, 7. Gothic, kingly, 8. Papal. Now suppose these phases of Roman power were represented by separate beasts, as is done in several similar cases. The papal phase would be the one that goes into perdition, seeing that it is under the papal phase that the fourth Roman beast of Daniel's vision is to be destroyed. But he is of the seven. What are we to make of this? The healing of the wounded sixth head gives us the answer to this. I will not repeat what was said on this, but you will recollect we saw that the establishment of the political papacy in Rome was the restoration of the imperialism that had been killed there by the sword of the Goths, and therefore the healing of the sixth head. The papacy is, in reality, the ancient pagan constitution of Rome revived and reproduced with Christian names and superstitions. Therefore, although the eighth, he is of the seven and goeth into perdition. Before passing from this point, it is well to notice the solemn implication of verse 8 as to the position of those before God who sympathize with the Roman system. They that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was and is not and yet is. What is this but a declaration that the sympathizers with the Roman system in all its ramifications are outside the pale of divine regard? The cry of uncharitableness will not scare away an earnest mind from the recognition of divine truth so plainly enunciated. It is either true or not true that all who admire papalism and its offshoots are unwritten in the book of life. If true, should we not be very careful to recognize and proclaim the fact? If not true, what are we to do with the Apocalypse and the Scriptures, of which they are an attested part? To attempt to displace them from their position of self-evident authority and truth is to attempt an impossibility. There is no alternative but to recognize their teaching however out of accord it may put us with our day and generation.